Now that the foundation of qualitative inquiry has been laid, the next step is to understand the design pathways that allow you to enter human experience with clarity and care. Each qualitative design is a way of seeing, a perspective, a stance, a particular relationship between the researcher, the participants, and the meaning they share. One design follows the curve of a person's story. Another sits quietly inside the felt essence of an experience. Another traces how a process unfolds over time. Another listens for the heartbeat of a culture. Another studies a system in its real-world context. These designs are not interchangeable. The research problem and the literature gap reveal which design is required, and the design then shapes the purpose statement, the research questions, the methodology, and the very verbs through which the study expresses itself. Before stepping into each design, it is important to understand how language guides the alignment of the entire study. Every qualitative design carries its own verbs, verbs that reveal the way the researcher enters the phenomenon. These verbs appear early, often before the method is named. They quietly shape the research problem, echo through the purpose statement, and crystallize in the research questions. When these verbs align, the study finds its coherence. When they do not, the study feels unstable, as if its sentences are trying to walk in different directions. Narrative work leans toward tell, recount, and construct. Phenomenology speaks through experience, perceive, and describe the essence. Grounded theory generates, develops, and constructs theory. Ethnography seeks to understand the culture of, explore the practices of, and interpret shared meaning. Case study explores, examines, and understands within context. These verbs keep the logic of the study connected to the kind of meaning the researcher intends to understand. This is the point at which the qualitative designs can unfold. Narrative research enters through story. It takes seriously the idea that people understand themselves by telling the events of their lives, by shaping beginnings, middles, and turning points, by choosing which memories matter most, and by interpreting how they became who they are. Narrative inquiry asks, what story does this person tell about their life, and what meaning lives within that story? Narrative work becomes the right design when the research problem centers on personal meaning across time. Its sampling reflects this. Not a large group but individuals whose experiences hold rich stories worth telling. The data carries the cadence of lived time. Long interviews, journals, letters, photos, artifacts, and the restoring process gathers these pieces into a coherent form that remains true to the participant's voice. In narrative work, the researcher's positionality becomes that of a listener, a companion, a respectful co-constructor who must be aware of how their interpretations shape the retelling. Time in narrative is fluid and sweeping, tracing how meaning develops across years. Purpose statements in narrative work use verbs such as explore, tell, or recount, and the research questions align by asking how individuals construct their stories, or describe the meaning of key events. Triangulation deepens the story by drawing from multiple sources that confirm the structure of the narrative. Phenomenology shifts inward from story to essence. It is not concerned with the timeline of a life. It seeks instead the shared inner meaning of a particular experience, the felt sense of what it is like to live that phenomenon. Phenomenology asks, what is the essence of this experience, and how do participants describe it in their own words? This design appears when the research problem reveals that the missing knowledge is experiential and emotional, something that cannot be understood without hearing participants speak the experience themselves. Unlike narrative, phenomenology does not tell a person's story. It gathers the significant statements of multiple participants and weaves them into a composite essence that reflects what they share at the deepest level. Sampling reflects this purpose. Those who have lived the experience in a richly meaningful way. The data carries the texture of lived experience. Interviews centered on what it felt like, journals capturing the inner landscape, written reflections that reveal the phenomenon's core. The researcher's positionality matters here, because phenomenology asks the researcher to bracket their assumptions long enough to hear the experience as participants describe it. Time in phenomenology sits inside the moment, inside what is felt rather than what unfolds chronologically. Purpose statements naturally use verbs such as experience, describe the essence, perceive, or understand what it is like, and research questions follow this orientation. Triangulation compares descriptions across participants to locate the essence that unites them. Grounded theory moves from essence to process. It steps into a space where the field can see that something is happening, but cannot yet explain how it unfolds. Grounded theory asks, what is the process underneath this phenomenon, and how does it develop step by step as people move through it? Grounded theory differs from narrative and phenomenology because it seeks to explain, not simply describe, to build theory, not retell stories or distill essence. Its sampling begins with participants who experience the process, and then evolves through theoretical sampling as emerging insights guide the next wave of data. Its data carries the movement of a process, multiple interviews with the same participants over time, observations of the process in action, documents showing shifts or adaptations, and memos capturing the researcher's analytic thinking. Positionality plays a major role here, because the researcher's interpretive lens shapes how categories form and how the theory emerges. Time in grounded theory is dynamic and unfolding, following the arc of action and reaction. Purpose statements use verbs like generate or develop a theory, and research questions mirror that intent. Because grounded theory requires constant comparison and analytic saturation, it often stretches beyond the scope of a dissertation. Triangulation supports the theory by comparing data across participants, over time, and through memos that reveal how insights take shape. Ethnography widens the lens again, shifting from process to culture. Ethnography asks, what are the shared beliefs, rituals, routines, and meanings that define this group's way of life? It becomes necessary when the research problem centers on a group's collective meaning, not individual experience or personal process. Ethnography differs from the other designs because it studies a culture from the inside, requiring long engagement so that patterns emerge naturally. The sampling reflects group life, participants who are part of the cultural setting being studied. Its data carries the heartbeat of a culture: field notes, observations, interviews, rituals, artifacts, events, routines. The researcher's positionality is crucial here because ethnography places the researcher inside a cultural world that is not their own. Reflexivity becomes an ethical responsibility, acknowledging how the researcher's identity shapes what they see and how they interpret it. Time in ethnography stretches across extended observation. Meaning emerges slowly, through presence rather than questioning alone. Purpose statements use verbs that reflect collective meaning-making, and research questions follow, asking how the group constructs or practices its culture. Triangulation emerges naturally from the interplay of observation, conversation, and cultural documents. Case study turns the focus from culture to context. It enters through a bounded system, a program, a school, an initiative, a team, where the phenomenon cannot be separated from the real-world conditions in which it occurs. Case study asks, how does this case function in its natural setting, and what meaning emerges from its unique structure? Case study differs from phenomenology, narrative, grounded theory, and ethnography because it does not search for essence, story, process, or culture. It studies a system as a whole. Sampling depends on the boundaries of the case. Participants connected to the program, initiative, or environment being studied. Its data carries the complexity of the case. Interviews showing varied perspectives, observations revealing interactions, documents uncovering decisions and structures. The researcher's positionality shapes how the system is understood, because every interpreter notices different aspects of the environment. Time in case study is contextual, bounded by the life of the case itself. Purpose statements use verbs such as explore or examine within context, and research questions align by asking how the system functions, or how a process unfolds in this setting. Triangulation is essential because understanding a system requires convergence across interviews, observations, and documents. Choosing the right qualitative design always returns to alignment. If the research problem centers on meaning across time, narrative inquiry reveals itself. If it seeks to understand the inner texture of a shared experience, phenomenology becomes the path. If it needs to illuminate the structure of a process, Grounded theory is the way to go. If the meaning lives within a group's shared norms and practices, ethnography becomes necessary. And if the system itself is the puzzle, case study is the design that can hold its complexity. When the verbs of the problem, the purpose, the questions, and the data all speak the same language, the study becomes coherent, moving as one unified expression of meaning. These designs remind us that qualitative inquiry is not only a method, but an act of honoring human life. Each design offers a different way of listening, a different way of seeing, a different way of understanding the truths people carry. Choosing the right design is a promise, a commitment to enter the phenomenon in the way that reveals its meaning most faithfully. Through story, essence, process, culture, and context, a well-aligned qualitative design becomes a pathway into human truth, one that stands in service of understanding, dignity, and change. And once this alignment is clear, the next step becomes possible, shaping the purpose and questions that will guide the study forward.